All right, hi everybody. Welcome to another monthly fireside chat talking about Dungeons and Dragons, care of Fan Meetups and Fan Expo Canada. I'm one of your hosts, Jeremy Johnston.
And I'm Angelo Corsino, your other host.
Yeah, and whether you're watching this live with us on Fan Meetups, which is meetups.fanexpohq.com, or checking us out later on YouTube from our Unite the Factions channel, which you can get the link to on unitethefactions.com. Just want to remind everyone that this is generally a rated PG sort of setting. We want to make sure that it's safe for anyone, whether they're leaving comments or adding something here to the live chat where we're recording right now. We do have our Q&A for the live chat open, so if you do have a question, you can go to the chat tab and go over to Q&A, and that allows us to clear the questions when we're done.
Yep, and as always, I keep pretty close tabs on the Q&A section, so if you have any questions, please let us know and we'll address them.
Yeah, so today we're talking about writing Dungeons and Dragons adventures, although I'm sure a lot of the things that we'll be talking about would relate to any role-playing game that you'd like to write adventures for. Obviously writing requires a lot of planning, a lot of thought, and it's usually the dungeon master or the game master that is doing this alone. And of course, role-playing games are games of improvisation. So, whether you're, in the middle of the game improvising or whether you're writing on the fly, it's just, important to remember not to go into, too much detail, but, just jot down, where you want to take your adventures. Writing your adventures might be, like I said, jotting down some notes and having some overarching ideas and such, or you might want to collect them, a little bit more fully and publish them later, and have other game masters or dungeon masters run them as well. Go ahead.
So when you're starting to pull together ideas, one of the most important things to remember is that as much as you want to write every little bit of detail that you possibly can to try to be prepared, you have to be ready to improvise. Even like you even put in like notes to yourself at where things could possibly go wrong. Even if you try to think of everything, your players are always going to think of something different, almost always. So one of the key things for adventure writing is having a flexible concept.
For sure.
So you want to be able to, like, because if you have a section that is like critical to your plot, and and your players have to decide to go there, unless you railroad them, and railroading is hardly, it's okay, but it's never really like usually what you want to do. It ends up getting to be a little bit awkward for your party when they feel like their decisions stop mattering.
Definitely want to avoid that. So at least, have different ways of them for dealing with situations, even if, you are going to take them in, to a place where they don't have a lot of options. I mean, obviously at the start of an adventure that you might be taking people through or writing for people, you might want to railroad it a little bit just to, get things moving, so to speak, to run with that metaphor. But, after a while, you want to kind of make it a choose your own adventure story. And I know that's a trademark, but, that's really what you're putting on for people. So it's got to branch a bit.
So when you're writing, there are lots of different places to get your ideas from. Odds are that everyone's read books or watched movies, TV shows. Those are all going to be sources for what you could possibly put in your adventure, like theme. And it doesn't have to be like this specific content. I'm talking like overarching themes and that sort of thing.
Yeah, because you're telling a story, and you've heard and seen a lot of stories in your lifetime. You know, there's elements of all of those, a lot of those that are probably the same, but there's just a little something different about it. And of course, with role playing, it's meant to be shared, storytelling. So even if you picked up a published adventure from Wizards of the Coast for Dungeons and Dragons, it's also going to be a vague in a lot of places, because they shouldn't have to tell you everything as a dungeon master for how to run an adventure. So likewise, when you're setting yourself up, again, you don't have to go to huge amounts of detail, get those ideas down as to where things can go, and what could possibly happen.
And to touch on that a little bit as well, the reason why Wizards does that is because they also understand that they want to leave some room for creativity for the dungeon master themselves. So like if Jeremy and I sat down and wrote an adventure together, and I ran it for one group and Jeremy ran it for another group, we're going to have two completely different stories, and that's totally fine.
For sure. And that's another good point. You don't have to write adventures alone. You might not necessarily want to write them with your players, because then, spoiler alert.
Well, that's just called improvising the entire thing.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And you can run a game that way where, you let the players do all the talking and you just pull threads from what they're talking about. But, we are certainly here talking about writing adventures. So that suggests that you're doing this ahead of time. But yeah, you can, do this with others, whether they are going to, if you're going to take turns running this adventure, or if you're going to publish it together, or if, you and a friend are dungeon masters with your own, kind of groups that you play with frequently. And, you just want to bounce ideas off each other for, potentially, similar campaigns or adventures that you want to run.
Yeah. And so that's actually a very important piece of like where to get your ideas. Like we were just discussing, what different ways to get your ideas. Your players are all going to have like backgrounds. They're all going to have stuff in game that they might pick up on in a town that sounds interesting. Take notes and don't be scared to incorporate that into the next session or 3 sessions down the road or something like that. As part of like, this is where we're saying that like even if you're writing a rigid adventure, be prepared to have a little flexibility.
And one cool thing that you could do in writing an adventure is write a flashback. How many times are you watching a show or a movie and they have a flashback that, it might even be a full episode of a TV show. You can do the same in an adventure, and you don't really, you might want to incorporate time travel into your adventure or maybe not. But with a flashback, it doesn't have to be time travel, but you can, play through something that, you wanted to cover, but didn't get a chance to, or, pulling on a thread, maybe you wanted to explore something like that more. Because, writing an adventure and writing a campaign are two different things, right? And you certainly do want to, if you're running a campaign, spend some time writing things out. Whether you're going to publish them or not, it would certainly be, a kind of adventure diary of sorts.
And that leads us in very nicely to the different types of adventures that you can kind of prepare for and try to write as a writer of adventures. So the most common thing, and this is from Wizards of the Coast, that people run are homebrew campaigns. So it's where somebody has come, they've taken stuff from their mind, put it on paper, written it all out, and that's the story that they run.
And that's where you can literally take things from TV shows, books, and movies and put them into your campaign. One of my favorite campaigns, growing up as a kid was when our game master threw in, stuff from Lord of the Rings or from the Sword of Shannara series, whether they were magic items or certain characters or places that you could visit by, using magic to get there. You can certainly do whatever you can imagine with a homebrew, adventure or a campaign that you're building yourself.
Yeah, and like a homebrew campaign, the sky's the limit, right? You have complete agency. You're in the driver's seat. Whatever you want to put in there goes in there, and Um, and basically the only advice I have for writing a homebrew campaign is it's not going to be like you're going to write this down, but you have to be prepared. Again, and I've said this 3 times now, this is how important this is. You have to be prepared for your players to want to do something different than what you have on the paper.
Yeah, and more than just writing an adventure, you could spend some time world building. Like what's behind that door, what's down that road, what's beyond that city, what's on the other side of that mountain, like those sorts of things. Have different places where you can go. So maybe there's a town that's run by a thieves guild, or maybe there's a mage tower. Just you don't have to have tons of stuff, and if your players really like go to these places or kind of pull the threads that you set up on these things, you can totally spend some time in between game sessions writing more.
So other than like big overarching heavy campaigns, another question. We're gonna get into encounter building soon, Josh. So I'll answer. We'll answer that when we get to encounter building. So the next type of adventure that we tend to run a lot of are one shots. So this is where you have a quick and dirty, 4-hour time block, where it's basically you're running a single quest that's going to have a couple of different story beats, and it's going to all wrap up nicely in one quick session.
Yeah, and maybe have 1 or 2 side quests available just in case things run a little bit faster than you anticipate.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and then another type of adventure might be one that you're actually going to publish for organized play, like adventure.
I have one.
Awesome. Yeah, we'll talk about where to find it at the end.
Yeah. So the next bit that we have is how to kind of put in plot threads. Because plot threads are important. They're kind of the overarching goal of your campaign. They're kind of what you want to have, and it's important on how you seed them to your players in part of your adventure. It's really cool. You can have this like really amazing kind of idea of you wanting to go do XYZ, but if you put in only like 1 or 2 very specific like niche ways to find out how to get to XYZ, there's a good chance your party just might completely miss it, and then you're going to be frustrated. So
sure.
Seeding your quests easily for what you want them to find is a very good way to, like, you don't want to just hand them like a piece of paper saying here's the quest, but at the same time you don't want them to miss it completely. You got to have that nice little balance point where they feel like they've had to work for it.
And knowing your audience is important. If you're writing this for your group of friends that you play with frequently, you might write knowing how they play. But if you're writing for a general audience where some people might be new or older players, take that into consideration when you're trying to figure out how easy you want to make certain things for people to find them. Obviously, if it's for a general audience, you want to make it pretty obvious as to where the adventure is going, because some people just want to get to the adventure and they might not necessarily want to dive in too deep on how to get to those deeper story elements. So throw them a flyer or have a quest giver, that sort of thing.
Yeah, and again, that's if you're trying to write a general like thing to publish, your strategy is going to be a lot different than if you're trying to write a much narrower block for a group that you're well versed with. And effectively what that all comes down to is just knowing what your overarching goals are, kind of little bits and pieces of information to kind of go off on slight tangents to help you get back to that main spot, and then giving the party options to do things completely different if they need a break from the main plot line. Because sometimes when you're running an overarching campaign, if you have like a really high intensity session, Sometimes it's good to have a session to follow up that's just a little bit lighter, and it's always
For
good to
sure.
have that option.
Yeah, ultimately, we're talking about writing your adventure so that people have to make choices to drive the story to where it goes next. Otherwise, like we said, you're railroading somebody. There is no choice. It's just like, do this, so that happens, and then that happens, and it's really flat. It's one dimensional, and it doesn't, you know, get people, thinking really. It can get
And,
pretty dull.
and we're not saying never railroad, because sometimes it's going to happen where you need to get something back on track, or something went wrong, or like so little bits and pieces of information got missed, and you kind of have to have a way to get them back on track. And it's not the worst thing, but when they try to have a mechanic in your notes and when you're writing, that's going to be able to get them back into play. And my favorite version of that is Harshnag and Storm King's Thunder. The party has no idea what to do because they've missed stuff. You throw Harshnag at them, and Harshnag brings them to where they need to go.
Yeah, that's using a non-player character or NPC to get someone back on track. Other times, if people are just like down a rabbit hole, and you want to get them back on track, you can basically make time is of the essence, right? Impress upon them that if they don't do something, within a certain time frame, something else is going to happen. Like the ceiling's going to collapse on top of them. Or they're getting chased by some monsters or something like that are just overwhelming. So to get them to move out of wherever they are, you can throw anything you want at them, but again, have those options and tools available to you, and to the players, to interact with as well.
All right, so now that we've done a little bit of like an overview of just the very basics on how to have, to start getting your adventure and things to be aware of and things to have in your mind when you're talking about it, we're going to start going into a little bit more of the like things to make to write in that make your story come to life.
Yeah.
Because without certain elements, it might as well be a novel, right?
And to get yourself started, especially if you're writing for Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition, I'm going to suggest that you actually read this book to some degree. Okay. A lot of people have purchased the book, a lot, and I would fathom a guess that a lot of people have not read it. It is a great resource for, finding out ways to, add things to your game. Player's Handbook has a lot of the mechanics of rules for the players to know how to play. But as a dungeon master, that is your toolbox to go to get all sorts of ideas to throw in.
All right. So one of the easiest ways to have your story come together and have like lots of things for your party to do is to put in some interesting NPCs. Now, you got to make sure that when you're writing NPCs that these are the supporting cast for this adventure. They are not going to be the stars of the show. The stars of the show are your players. And try to not get into the trap where you feel like if you have an NPC there, you get to play with them too, kind of thing, because it can often you can often run into trouble where your NPC they start to look to your NPC for all the answers because your NPC is you.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. An NPC is not your player character that's a member of the party. Now, that's not to say that you might not have, a non-player character join the party, maybe for an extended period of time, maybe just for a short time in your adventures as you kind of link them together. Or maybe they're a reoccurring person that shows up, but yeah, like Angelo said, it's as a dungeon master or a game master, you never want to be a player character at the same time. As much as it's not, the dungeon master versus the players, at the same time, it's, you're not super friendly and a part of that group either. Has to be that kind of separation. But yeah, having colorful characters can really, uh, make the story, more compelling and a little bit more, real, something that they can really dive into. It's also important to name your non-player characters, and or at least have, a bunch of names readily available within your adventure. Especially if you're going into certain settings with certain races or peoples or languages. Do your own homework, whether you're doing world building or go to lore if you're looking for things to add names, just so that when someone asks, you've got it. Especially if it's something you want to develop more. Spend some time figuring out, what are the motivations of these non-player characters, not unlike, the ideals and the bonds and such that players create. You can spend some time doing that with your non-player characters as well. And, some of these people might be friends or family members of the players. They could be their mentors, they could be the mentees. There's all sorts of cool stuff that you can do with non-player characters to add your
And
adventure.
they can just be people in a tavern, because let me tell you, if you put a tavern in and you say that they're patrons, your party's going to want to talk to every single one of them, and they're going to ask for their name, and you're going to want to have a list of names, or others you're going to be paralyzed like I often am, trying to
Yeah,
come up with a name on the spot.
yeah. Mar is not that great of a name.
No, neither is Dave, as Carlo likes to use, our buddy.
Or Buddy.
Anyway.
Yeah.
So we've talked about some NPCs. We've talked about some overarching world building. Now, here's where the adventure comes to life. Here's where the meat and potatoes of your adventure comes from, and it comes from your encounters. Now, when I say encounters, what am I talking about, Jeremy?
Yeah, we're talking about the pillars of play. Everything that is one small part of writing your adventure is an encounter, whether that is a combat encounter or a social encounter, or maybe it's an exploration encounter. Fifth edition calls these the pillars of play, but they're just a set of scenes, almost like in a show, where your players are going to do something with their characters and some others, and then you link these scenes or encounters together to make up your adventure overall.
Yeah, that's why I call it the meat and potatoes, because you have your overarching world with your setting, your overarching theme, your overarching idea. You have bits and pieces of quests and how to get there, but when you get to the actual quest and it's time for the party to actually do something that involves decision making and possibly dice rolling, whether it's meeting a contact in a tavern, that's a social encounter, or going through a dungeon trying to avoid traps, that's an exploration encounter, or getting into a large scale combat with several moving parts and terrain that shifts and that sort of thing. These are all different types of encounters. They're all enveloped in what are called the pillars of play. So we're going to go into a little bit of detail about what and how to write for each of the pillars.
Right. And we're going to start with what Joshua was asking about.
Mm-hmm. So anyone who's ever played with me or knows me at all as a dungeon master, my specialty is running combat. So when you're running combat, and I like to design my combat encounters, you have to try to see where you have the party and what the area is, what could possibly be there, what could and so, because if you have creatures that have no business being in that setting, it's going to kind of your players are going to want start wondering how they got there, and then you're going to have more questions to answer, that sort of thing. So you got to try to line up your monsters and creatures with what could possibly be in the setting that you're in. Like if you're in the Underdark and all of a sudden, there's a platoon of Celestials down there, it's like, well, where the heck did they come from?
Why are they there? Yeah.
Why are they there? That could possibly do some things. Or you can just use more traditional Underdark monsters that are expected to be there, and you can just have it be a little bit more balanced. So Josh's question: what do you find is the best way for utilizing CR for parties to give the players a balanced, challenging experience? Sometimes CR can be a little misleading. CR is the very worst metric that Wizards of the Coast put in for encounter building.
Definitely. And it's based on an average party level.
Yeah, and
so just
it doesn't matter at all.
No, it really doesn't. And it really depends also on your party makeup. So again, if you're writing this for a group of characters that you know, it's a little bit easier. But if you are writing in general, you really gotta think about, again, more than just the setting, but what are the mechanics that are available to everyone to make sure that it's balanced.
Yeah, because the way CR is I don't even understand how they calculate it because it varies so widely. So let's pick CR5 because this is the one that I always use as an example when I talk about combat. What's it called? Challenge rating for monsters. So for undead at CR5, you have the options of a greater zombie, which is a pretty hefty zombie. It's got like 90 hit points. It punches really hard twice, and that's about all it does. It has no ranged attacks. It doesn't have anything extra or interesting. And at the same CR, same undead theme, you have the Zombie Beholder, which has the disintegration ray, which has like all sorts of like more powerful things that it can do. And they're the same CR for some reason. The Zombie Beholder is way more challenging because it has the potential to like insta-kill people in your party, whereas the other zombie just gets overwhelmed quickly and doesn't do anything. So when I design encounters, I look for a couple of different things. If I have a 5-person party, my encounter that I am going to build is going to have 4 monsters. It's going to have one monster that is like the big threat in the fight. That's going to be like a heavy hitting monster that's going to be dynamic and challenging for the party. And then I'm going to have a second monster that's just a sack of hit points. It's going to eat up actions. It's going to drive the party to do things differently in order to kind of get in there, and they have to try to get around this big. It's like the barbarian in your player's party. It's the thing that's there to eat hit points for the other creatures. And then I want 2 tech monsters that have some sort of unique ability that's going to get my party thinking. That's so like like a Dubyuk is a good example. It's a kind of, I think that's how you pronounce it anyway. It's a little CR4 demon that has Dimension Door at will. So you've got your archers in the back line that are trying, your wizards in the back line that are hanging out, and all of a sudden there's 2 demons in front of them that have Dimension Door beside them. Now they've got to think.
Yeah, and much like what you said, with the zombie being melee attack or close range attacker, you want to put stuff in there that's more than just fighting with weapons and such. Maybe some magic users as well, or at least some ranged attacks, so that there's some dynamic abilities for the monsters that they're facing.
So Trevor has an interesting comment in the chat. It says, more monsters prevents the PCs from overwhelming them by economy of actions. This is true. The way that you kind of go around that is to have your monsters have actions that are going to impact multiple things, or such. This is why I'm saying the Zombie Beholder is such a good one, because when it fires its eye ray, you sometimes removing a character from the fight with like a sleep or a sort of telekinesis effect or something along those lines. Having more monsters than players can get dangerous and then you have to try to kind of pull back sometimes, because if the action economy is too skewed towards the monsters, it gets ugly really fast.
Yeah, and if they have some really bad rolls, then they can fail utterly, and you could TPK them quite easily if you overwhelm them too much, even with low CR creatures. I've seen it in my more recent experience, especially with Rime of the Frost Maiden.
Rime of the Frost Maiden is brutal. But yeah, so when you're saying that, like, having more monsters prevents the PCs from overwhelming them, this is true. The other thing that when I'm designing combat encounters, and is that this will help with the overwhelming them, is that you don't want to put your party of 5 players and your 4 monsters in like a fireball size space, because now the 2 Aoki casters that your party has blasts all your monsters twice, and now they're all gone. You want to have a little bit of room to work, that gives your party and the monsters a little bit of space. One of the it's hard to do when you're in buildings, but you can do things like have them come from behind, have them come through walls, stuff like that, in order to kind of throw off the spacing. Because if you've got like a hallway and 4 monsters and then your party, they're just going to blast them at range, and your encounter is going to be over before you get to do anything.
And in terms of like writing this down, you want to write down what creatures you're going to use. If you're publishing this, you're going to have to include the stat blocks, and you'll have to give it a bit of range so that if either one of your players is missing from your group one week, or if you're writing this and maybe people have a party of 3 or some people have a party of 7, you want to be considering how to scale it. So that might be, reducing hit points of certain creatures or raising hit points of certain creatures, like to the maximum of its hit dice. And you might even consider reinforcements if people kind of blow through things too fast.
Mm-hmm.
So that, if they get some really good rolls where, you were trying to balance the encounter so as not to kill them, if they just had, a few rounds of really garbage rolls, they could be critting nonstop. It could happen. It's happened before, certainly to me in my experience. So bring in some reinforcements. There's nothing wrong with someone seeing, oh my gosh, my fellow monsters or fellow jail guards or something like that are getting thwacked. I'm gonna run and go get reinforcements, and maybe they're the last person on the initiative order, and they actually get to do that because everyone else has used their reactions and such.
Yes.
Or just yell for help.
Yep. They can always yell for help if they're in a building, that sort of thing. And that's where it comes down to, like, using kind of different elements to spice up the encounter, because it's always good to have your party's here, their party's there, and they smash together in the middle. It's going to be good most of the time, but every once in a while it's just going to be a complete wash, especially when your party starts getting stronger and stronger abilities. It means that you have to start designing more and more complex encounters in order to challenge them in a way that is meaningful. Otherwise,
and the other thing is, in writing encounters and using dynamic terrain and stuff, as has been brought up, is you can work that into the story, right? So maybe one of the people that they are fighting, it has plot armor, and they are going to get away because they are going to become the villain of the campaign until they dispatch them and find out that there was someone controlling them or something. The much bigger villain. Right?
These are all story beats that we were talking about earlier. Steal from your favorite sources of media, and use the ideas, but don't copy it directly, because that's not cool.
No, definitely not. We don't want plagiarism, for sure.
But back to combat encounters.
Yep.
So when the main things when you're designing combat is that you have to try to keep it dynamic. We're coming to social encounters in a minute, Trevor. We'll get there. Those are a little bit trickier to balance sometimes. So when it comes down to combat, the easiest way to make it so that your combat counter is fun is to give things space, and know what you can do with your monsters to make your party think and be a little bit uncomfortable. If you've got a rogue that's just sitting in the back steady aiming all day with its bow, you can have a creature burrow from underneath, stand beside them, and now they're uncomfortable. There's little things that you can do when you're in your combat encounters to make it so that your party has to think. Keep them moving, keep things kind of interesting. Because let's be real, as a dungeon master, if you want to, it's not hard to TPK a party.
No, definitely not. Especially after a lot of legendary actions or lair actions.
Like if you just if they've got like one or two healers and you just, bypass their front line and go beat up the two healers and then turn back in, it starts to get ugly. But like that's not fun. What you want to do is you want to have them hurting, but you don't want to TPK them. If it
No, but
happens, it happens.
yeah,
But
and it is Dungeons and Dragons. People can be resurrected, and maybe that's something you're building into the story. And maybe instead of them all thinking themselves dead, maybe that is, again, something you're writing into the adventure to bring them into slavery or, put them in jail. And that's part of the story. It doesn't have to end. Uh, One thing that I like about some sandbox adventures that I've run or read is that, if you want to make it a little bit more realistic, if your level one characters, run into, the wilds and go into, the biggest dungeons that they hear about at the tavern that, the more experienced adventurers are talking about, they're certainly going to die. Like put limits there, show them that, they're going to have to, do certain things or become, more experienced or powerful to get to where they want to go.
all right, so we've talked about combat encounters, and that's a pretty good lead into our next section, which is the exploration encounters. And Trevor, we're coming to social encounters after these. So,
But part of his question is actually the exploration pillar.
true.
Yes. So we'll definitely touch on that. So yeah, exploration is where, again, it's one of these scenes, and it could be a very long scene, from what you're building into your adventure, where people go to a new town or they are exploring a dungeon or, a desert. They could be visiting new interesting places like lost cities, or they could even go into someone's dreams. There's all sorts of different things that people can explore. This is a more difficult piece to write for than combat, as it's not quite all about mechanics, but it is a place where you can put a lot of threads. What, again, as I mentioned before, what's behind that door, what's down that road, what's over the mountain. People want to know these things, and you can give them reasons why. Uh, Maybe they're looking for a certain person or a certain object, or maybe they're trying to escape somewhere and they don't have a map. Sometimes in your adventures, maybe you want the players to draw the map of where they are. If they go left, is it a dead end? Well, maybe not. Like, you don't have to write everything unless you're looking to publish this adventure, but it could be, pretty interesting and dynamic to, put one of these random exploration encounters of escaping somewhere into what you're doing.
Yeah, and this goes back to one of our original points at the beginning, which was the side choices to kind of get to your overarching plot goal. They're walking down the road, and one of your plot devices is at a lighthouse at the top of the hill. Well, if you just say they're walking down the road and you only mention the lighthouse, well, they'd be like, well, I guess you got to go to the lighthouse. But if you go say that, there's a lighthouse at the top of the hill, there's a roadside inn to the left, and then, straight ahead off in the distance, you can see some sort of strange weather pattern. Now you've given them more options, and as long as those are all things that they can interact with, they don't feel like they're railroaded, and they're probably going to go to all three.
Yeah. Oh, well, if there's smoke rising in the distance, what's happening, or all you see is that, a haze or, like flames and such. Put a lot of, description into these sorts of things, pull from your own personal experiences. If you've played in certain games or watched certain things or traveled to certain places, or would like to travel to places, and you have these ideas in your mind, put them on paper. If you find them interesting, other people probably do too.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's the kind of like just gist of how to get a little bit of exploration, like the exploration pillar. Exploration encounters can be a little bit more like, traps along the side of the road, traps in a dungeon. How to
Ambushes.
well, ambushes lead to combat, but
Yeah, maybe.
maybe they also could lead to social.
Yeah.
Um, another thing that a lot of and it hurts me every single time are puzzles.
Yeah, and if you love puzzles, or they could be math games like tangrams and such. They could be codes, whether they use the spoken word or the written word. There's all sorts of puzzles that you can build in, and some great tools in Tasha's Cauldron of Everything
Yeah.
on doing both of those things.
So with puzzles, in my opinion, and this is from somebody who really doesn't like them very much, and the reason why I don't like puzzles that much is that I don't like things that take me out of my character and expect me to use my knowledge as a player in the game. So for me, the best puzzles are ones that they solve using their character.
Definitely.
Whether it's jumping over a little ravine, how to get to the other side of that bridge with the bridge out, how to ford this river, how to get through this patch of quicksand, things like that.
Yeah, how to unlock a door, or some complex lock.
These
You
are
know,
all puzzles
yeah,
that are in.
finding keys, or using clues to find what you're looking for, instead of a more complicated or developed uh, um, puzzle. Yes. Um, and from Trevor's question of suggesting, the challenge of crossing a desert where the desert is the antagonist, I would actually use that as, or consider that, an exploration encounter. Because, one thing that I find that, in my experience of playing, that doesn't get used enough is that kind of element of survival. Some people think that eating and drinking water and kind of having your own rations and stuff is boring, and they kind of ignore that sort of thing, just like they do encumbrance rules. But if you're putting together a large campaign, definitely the environment can be the antagonist of the party.
Oh, absolutely. Like if you're going in and your party knows that this is going to be a survival style campaign where, you know, you're going to have to try to find food and it's important to do so. And they do use this. They use that a lot in Out of the Abyss, actually, which is another one
Mm-hmm.
from Wizards of the Coast, where the environment can absolutely be like a giant exploration encounter to try to survive and collect
Yeah,
enough food so that you can that your party can keep going. It's interesting. It's a tough one to balance because it can get a little bit either brutal or boring.
correct.
But if you can find that balance, it can be an interesting dynamic to add to your campaign.
Yeah. Or, even something like if people are trying to escape a prison and they get to a door and they open it. Well, what if they find out that that prison is floating in the air and they don't have feather fall, or they don't know how to fly? You can certainly make the environment, or ways that they're exploring, kind of, work against them.
Hmm.
A labyrinth is a puzzle, right?
Exactly. These are puzzles that they solve in character.
Yep.
As like, and don't get me wrong, if you have a party that loves puzzles, put in those other kinds of puzzles. 100%, absolutely do it. But my personal standpoint is when I write my adventures and my encounters, all of my puzzles, I try to have that they can solve them in character.
Yeah. All right. So let's jump into the next pillar, which is social encounters.
And this
Okay.
is incredibly broad.
Yes, this is broad. I mean, you generally start most adventures with a social encounter. People are going to be, meeting up together, meeting with others, and trying to figuring out, what's available to them. And that in itself is a social encounter. Now, you don't have to start with a social encounter. People could, just wake up at the beginning of an adventure, and they could all be in prison, or they could, be at sea attacked by a monster, like it can be abrupt, and sometimes that can be really cool too, to draw people into an adventure where they don't even get that chance to have that first social encounter.
Yeah. So
The
the
social encounter,
very
go ahead.
speaking of that, the adventure that I have published, the very first words in the adventure, when it gets time to actually start, are have the players roll initiative.
Awesome.
And I'm not going to spoil why, because there's a reason why we did it like that. Me and my partner I wrote it with, but you do not have to have them start in a cliche manner.
Yeah. So you can write an adventure that is only a social encounter. Okay. So if people, are going to meet up and meet each other for the first time at the beginning of a campaign, then you should role play that out. You shouldn't just slam people together. There needs to be some story there. Maybe in your session 0, prior to writing this stuff, people have decided that they're friends and such, but that might not necessarily be true. And especially if you're writing something for, a group of players that you won't be running for, you're going to want there to be some sort of social encounter for them to, at least figure out why they're doing this together. Put in
Exactly.
some of those non-player characters, or quest givers, to kind of, present, the setting, to, give the quests to people to get them started.
Yeah.
More
Like,
complex social encounters that kind of, can be introduced might be something like, a negotiation or a mock trial, or, maybe the quest is trying to convince somebody to come back home, because their parents, have hired the adventurers to go get that person,
mhm.
and convince them that they should, return either to their friends or family, lover, however you want to color it.
Yeah, exactly. Like, don't when you're writing social encounters, don't be scared of cliche, because cliche is familiar. So because of that, like familiarity, your party, it's easy for your party to interact with. And this is good for if you're writing a more broad, like for a more broad audience, is to, have the dark, shady looking traveler in the corner who's going to give your party a quest to go bring a ring to Mount Doom. Like, just have be as cliche as you need to be to get your
Mhm.
story going.
Yeah, and social encounters can be easy too. Again, another thing that I don't see enough of that I like to throw into my adventures is shopping. you know you can spend, a good part of an adventure having people looking for something, or just exploring a bazaar, um, you know of any sort. I mean, certainly, if the bazaar's in hell, what could be there, right? If you're, you know well, and there's probably lots of seedy characters you can add in there too, and have a lot of fun. But again, don't forget that they might ask for people's names.
Yeah,
So have
when
the
you're
names
writing,
ready
if
to
you're
go.
writing a social encounter, have a list of names for everybody who
Yeah.
could possibly be in that room, because you're gonna need it.
Yeah. And write a small paragraph for, each place they can visit at least, because they need, again, stuff to pull from. Your social encounter, could, lead to a quest, or maybe it is on its own, looking for that MacGuffin, right? And again, maybe that's a shopping trip, or maybe again it's a negotiation, because they need to trade something or do something for someone else, and then you can create, those threads that kind of lead them from one thing to another. The social way is the easiest way to kind of draw those things together, where whether it's, again, the quest giver, or if it's that person that stole something from them that runs away,
Hmm.
that leads them to an encounter in the sewer against the thieves guild. You can write all those things and bring them together with these,
Mm.
small social elements.
Also, be prepared if you write an encounter like that to be prepared for the party to have something in their tool bag to stop that person from running away.
Mhm. And if
Because,
they decide not to follow them, you should have something lined up as well. It is a game
yep,
of choices.
It is a game of choices. Nothing is more disheartening to a party, and we're not going to pick an adventure at random that we both premiered playing at convention in Buffalo, where somebody, my co-host, broke the encounter and the DM had no idea what to do because there wasn't anything in there on what to do if the person doesn't get away.
Yeah, again, if you make something too railroady, your
party will break it.
Yeah, they will. You can't anticipate everything, nor will the dungeon master or game master that's reading your adventure. But try to have at least a couple things going on in any encounter, social, combat, or otherwise. And social encounters might not be balanced either. Okay, you might not have a lot of charismatic players in your group. Okay, but maybe they have charismatic characters, right?
Or vice versa. Vice versa is also interesting, and I'll get to that after Jeremy's done.
Yeah, and that can get to some mechanics as well, right? Are they persuading somebody? Are they deceiving somebody? You can work some mechanics into your social encounters as well.
And don't be, and the other side of that is don't be scared as a DM and as a writer to have a thing in there that says, if the party gives you a really good reason and makes a very good argument, don't leave it up to the dice. This is
Correct.
A role-playing game.
Yes.
If they role-play well, reward them. That way they'll role-play more.
Yes, and just because you might want somebody to make a deception or a persuasion check, let them use another skill if they're going to be creative, and encourage people that in your writing as well.
Reward creativity.
Yeah, let yourself know, remind yourself, or if you're writing this to be run by others, let them know that if your players are creative, let them solve things in different ways. All right, so what the next thing we want to talk about before we get into some of the final closing things is treasure. Okay, because yes, have some overarching goals, but also have some tangible rewards for your players. And so just quickly on treasure, because we've talked about treasure before in one of our earlier fireside chats. Don't give out too much treasure, or it becomes too easy to acquire items, and it takes away from the value of those rewards. And watch out for overpowered items. You don't want to add some legendary items into the game very early, or if you do, maybe you have to fix that item by finding something else, and you can make that item kind of level up with the party should they get more pieces of it, or maybe that's again the MacGuffin or item that they're going to use to win the day overall.
Yeah, so the biggest problem sometimes that when you're giving out treasure is that you forget about what you've given the party, and your encounter 2, 3, 4, 5 sessions down the road is completely bypassed by an item that you gave them forever ago.
Yeah, we did get a question there that Angela answered in the chat about what are thoughts about giving inspiration for good role playing and social encounters. Yeah, definitely use inspiration, use it often, and encourage your players to use it. Usually you don't necessarily write that into an adventure, but you might, maybe going into a social encounter, if they do this, then they get inspiration. You could put that in there, right?
Yep.
Especially
that is the thing you can add directly into the writing.
Encounters. So if you used a social way to get out of a combat encounter and made a friend out of somebody, then you're going to have inspiration whenever you talk with them later. So maybe you made an ally out of the Red Wizards of Thay, and you have inspiration in speaking with them because you saved a Zalkir or something like that. But obviously, if you killed them, you're not going to have that as something you take away from it. But you can write little things like that into your adventures.
Yeah. So back to treasure. Uh, the worst thing that you can do with treasure is give your party incredibly powerful stuff, because now you need to have an arms race when you're writing encounters later.
Yeah, definitely.
Because items, everything that's in the DMG for the most part is supposed like is how to write the encounters without magic items in mind. As soon as you start putting in magic items into play, things become a lot harder to write for, because most of the magic items are very powerful in the situation that like they're good at, for example.
Yeah. At
Like
the
you don't want
same
to give
time,
a level 4 character a staff of power, because now you're going to have to figure out how to deal with 5th level fireballs in every encounter.
yeah, no, that's a bit much. But, don't be stingy either. Once you get to the second tier of play or levels 5 through 10, make sure there are some magic items for
Hmm.
people to get, because that's where you start to get into creatures that are resistant to mundane items.
Hmm.
Okay, so just to kind of wrap up, writing your adventure, as opposed to just putting in all these elements, other things you're going to want to throw in there is art. Whether it's for your home group or whether you're publishing this, you definitely want to source some stuff that you can share, either, in person on paper, or maybe, miniatures, or maybe it's, if you're publishing, you're going to go out and get some art for it. When you're writing an adventure, like they say, a picture is worth 1,000 words, right? And putting that picture in there gives a lot of context to what you're trying to show, or what you're trying to say, or what the creature looks like that you've developed to put in there. And therefore there's a lot of value in it. Pay
Hmm.
for art if you're not the artist, right? Don't just grab stuff off the internet. I mean, that's fair for a home game, but really, if you're going to use it, support
Yeah.
the artists where
Oh
you
yeah, if
can.
you're using it for anything published, buy that art.
Oh,
Save
well,
yourself the
must.
headache down the road. You have to buy that art.
Yeah. And even still, just as a side note, not so much about writing, maybe, the players and yourselves want to put together some money and get an artist to, draw the party, you know, or draw some maps. And that's the next thing, maps. Obviously, you're going to want to throw some maps in there to help either yourself, or if you're publishing it for other dungeon masters, to know where people are going and what they're getting into, kind of give them the lay of the land. I also think it's a good idea to, if there are, higher levels and lower levels, and your terrain is really important in the maps that you're drawing, which are usually top down, you know show it from the side view type of thing as an image on another page again, so
Hmm.
either you can kind of share it with the players once they've kind of got an idea of what something might look like. Example I was thinking is, if you get swallowed by a Tarrasque or a whale or something like that, a top-down map isn't going to do it justice, but kind of seeing it from the side, even if it's a cutaway, again, a little bit later, once they figure out they have been swallowed by something, it'll definitely add to, the immersion of the
Yeah,
experience.
absolutely. We're all visual people. Theater of the mind is great, but visual aids just help so much when you're running anything. And
Mhm. So lastly, we've talked a lot about publishing, right? So maybe you're not writing the adventure for yourself, or maybe you've gone through a campaign and have a lot of notes and these mini encounters and such that you've put together, and you want to publish them. There is a place where you can do that, and that is dmsguild.com. You are allowed to publish 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons adventures there. They have their own set of rules that you must follow. There's
mhm.
only certain content and settings that you can write for. But if you want to learn more, check out dmsguild.com, or even through Adventurers League. They have a program called Dungeon Craft, which has come forth after the ending of the community created content program. And of course, if you want to learn more about Adventures League, you can go to dnd.wizards.com/ddal_general. And of course, if you want to, see some more of us talking, you can check out fan meetups. We put these on monthly. So meetups.fanexpohq.com, or you can hit us up where we hang out on Discord. You can find a link on unitethefactions.com.
Yep, that's all of the possible links to where you can find us, more of this content. So if you like us, join our Discord, Unite the Factions. We're pretty active on it. And if you have, maybe we'll see you there.
All right, so thanks everyone, and we hope to game with you or speak with you soon.
No, we hope that you learned about writing adventures.
Oh, definitely. Bye.
Bye.